Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to have a look at Waterloo. So I've skipped to about 34 minutes in of Waterloo just because the first bit is all, there's not really much to talk about. So you've got Napoleon comes back from Elba after being in exile. Marshal Ney says, I'll bring him back in an iron cage. All this other nonsense. The thing actually happened where he walked out in front of the army and said, if anyone wants to shoot their emperor, go now. But it's just this patriotic thing, but really Napoleon was basically bribing the army with huge pay bonuses and basically doing what the old Roman emperors did, where basically Napoleon used the army a lot, so he needed the army on his side, so he paid them well. The king didn't need the army on his side, so he obviously had to cut their pay in peacetime, get rid of a lot of people. So the army was quite happy to have Napoleon back until he massacred them all. So we stick off at the Duchess of Richmond's ball, where we can see these Highlanders from either the Light or the Grenadier Company. A bunch of men in skirts, holding hands, dancing. It's manly, yeah. The reason you can't tell if they're Light or Grenadiers is because the shoulder tufts mean light flank companies, but without the shaker you couldn't tell. Okay, so you have okay, that's meant to be Lord Hay. He was at the Duchess of Richmond's ball. He did not have a relationship with the Duchess of Richmond's daughter. He was actually related to her, so that's a bit weird.
Uncle Gordon raided his whole regiment for my inspection.
Gordon is a composite character. The guy who Gordon really is playing, the colonel of the regiment, would actually have been her her cousin or her brother or something, like very close relative. So which one's Lord Hay again? Yes, I think that's Lord Hay. This did happen, although this wasn't as anywhere near as extravagant a ballroom. It was sort of done in this country house. As your generic cavalry officers there. It was done in a it was done not in a barn, but in sort of like just a property somebody owned. And it was done up nice, but it wasn't in a proper ballroom. And to show you how rough these guys, like they had no idea what was going to happen. 2 days after this was about 2 weeks after this. Sorry, Wellington himself had actually had a ball plan. So there was sort of a the army was not exactly on a war footing. Well, obviously it was on a war footing, but it wasn't on like a knife edge as they thought. They were not immediately thinking they were going to go into action. There's a fly on the camera, sorry. So, and of course the Duchess of Richmond was very stingy with these invitations. To get one was quite a big deal. Especially since just at the start she gave out so many and then had to retract them. Oh, not retract them, but had to basically stop her staff from just inviting people. It's Arthur himself. With his aide-de-camp. The rest is this is basically pretty... Skip through all this. This is pretty basic stuff here. Guard, here we go. Okay, fun fact, we see a lot of the French uniforms, and that's obviously they had uniforms, but a lot of guys would have fought in the overcoats because they didn't have uniforms. So a lot of guys would have actually fought at Waterloo in civilian clothes with the coat over the top of it, which is lucky for them because it was in the middle of summer, and the start of summer, but it was actually quite cold and rainy, so it didn't matter too much. So. Of course, the joys of being in the cavalry are you don't get wet when you cross waist deep water, as the infantry would. Lancers there, of course, look like people have a habit of seeing lancers and they go, oh, Polish, but those were actually Polish lancers. This generic dancing again. That's Lord Hay. Lord Hay was killed at Quatre Bras.
seen such a set of sprats.
It's Picton.
General Picton doesn't even know how to walk in a ballroom.
But he's...
He actually did. Picton was actually quite a upper-class gentleman. He just forgot his uniform.
Where?
Or it hadn't arrived yet, sorry.
At Charleroi.
There was a bit of debate about where Napoleon was, whether he was at Mons or at Charleroi. The army was at Charleroi, but they figured Napoleon would head for Mons. But, he obviously didn't head for Mons. And the Allies were furiously looking for Napoleon himself to try and confirm where the army was.
No, I want no alarm. All of us as obliged ladies will finish the dance.
So behind him you have Uxbridge. Not sure if the cursor can see. You have Uxbridge here in this hussar jacket. He despised Wellington, and Wellington despised him. They hated one another after Uxbridge ran off with Wellington's his brother's wife. His sister-in-law, he ran off with him. Uxbridge himself was married at the time too, so he ran off. This married man ran off with another married man's wife. That man happened to be the ambassador to Spain, which is a really bad idea to run off with his wife in the middle of the Peninsular War. And Wellington's brother was, of course, was it the British Foreign Office or the British Home Office? One of the two. He was very high-ranking in the British overseas military stuff. So it pissed him off. And then, of course, Wellington himself was pissed off. And Uxbridge was taken away from Wellington and basically not retired, but kept at home. And he used to be in charge of the cavalry. He was replaced by the gentleman here. He was replaced by Major General Ponsonby. Ponsonby, of course, is famously killed at Waterloo, but we'll see that later. So, yes, we have the former commander of the cavalry next to the current commander of the cavalry. Technically, Uxbridge is in charge of basically all the cavalry at Waterloo. Picton has his own division, of course. And this is Gordon, who is not actually a real character, but this is basically an amalgamation of a few other characters. So, it's still legit.
Uxbridge, move your cavalry immediately towards Charleroi. Picton, your division will march out tonight.
Essentially, he's forcing what Napoleon's marched in between the two armies, and he's basically sending a screen up towards the British. And if the British fight Napoleon, then they can't move to get into the Prussians. But if they don't fight Napoleon, they can't get to the Prussians anyway. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
Willie, you can ask the Duke. He allowed ladies in Spain. We've had so little time together.
But, madam, the battle is no...
This is meant to be Lord Hay. Lord Hay is killed immediately the next day at Quatre Bras, not at Waterloo. Quatre Bras is really overlooked in this film, which I get because it's based on Waterloo, but still.
On his right, he should be there by now. He should have come by Mons.
True.
Let's concede he's going to it cost of diplomacy. If Marshal Blucher stays in Belgium, I stay too.
On that promise, Lord Duke, Blucher would tie his men to trees if necessary.
Blucher rules.
Here.
Cabra, he's bound to go for them, sir.
We can't hold him there. I'll stop him here.
You notice that Picton's now with the 5th, not with the 3rd. Picton had the 3rd Division in Spain. He was actually quite pissed that he didn't get a title out of it. He only got a knighthood out of his service in Spain, not an actual baronet or a baronet or a baron, which are two different things. By the way, I'll get into that later. Basically, a baronet is basically your thing, and then you pass that on to your kids, but you're just called Sir. It's a whole thing. This is the aftermath of Quatre Bras. See the French medical stuff here, which is cool. Although the French medical would have been way more active than just this, but obviously...
The glory is never a pretty sight.
I love the uniforms in the background.
Nevertheless,
See the chasseurs?
That's good news, this slap on the walls of Paris.
The chasseurs de Chevelle in the green uniforms. Those are Napoleon's basically personal bodyguard troops.
I caught him at Quatre Bras. He's retreating.
If he's retreating, what are you doing here?
Well, I came to make my report.
If Wellington's retreating, what are you doing here? Why didn't you follow him? Why didn't you pursue him?
Where were the reinforcements you promised me?
Don't you dare criticize me! Don't you dare!
Classic Napoleon.
Don't you see if Wellington's free to choose his ground? Everything I've won in this campaign, you've lost!
I've won. Yeah. Very arrogant little prick he was.
Marshal Blucher, the sector is broken. I have...
There's all sorts of theories about Ney. I personally think that the one that him fleeing to America is quite believable. There's all sorts of, again, even then, if he flees to America, which I think is probable, because the circumstances are just... I'm actually going to make a video about Peter Stewart Ney and the incredible similarities, the exact same wounds, the exact same scars, the exact same age, the fact he was a fencing master, the fact he looked exactly like Marshal Ney, the fact he spoke perfect French, the fact he showed up in America the year after Ney died, the fact that he tried to kill himself when Napoleon died, the fact that he had a book on the Napoleonic Wars with stuff in the margins written all over it that only Ney could know, the fact that when he died he yelled, "I am Ney of France," the fact that anyway. But then there's the whole thing before that of, did he flee because he was given a deal to flee, or did he flee because he purposely tried to do this, purposely tried to sabotage Napoleon? There's all sorts of theories about that. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. That may be another video on this Ney conspiracy, which I believe the second half of. Well, not believe it, I think the second half of it is quite probable. The whole what and why he did stuff, that is really murky, and I haven't really got an opinion on that. This is Field Marshal Gebhard von Blucher, the most badass MF of the Napoleonic period. One of. Blucher was shot multiple times, then ridden over by heavy cavalry a whole bunch of times. And Blucher's just a complete hard as nails prick. He's in his 70s. He's great. Blucher's awesome. There's heaps of miniatures of Blucher out there. He's really, really cool. I believe he's I don't think he's Prussian. I think he's something else, but he fights for the Prussians. He became Prussian at quite a young age. I'm not sure about that. I don't know much about the Prussians.
I've ordered a retreat.
Retreat? I am 72.
72.
Soldier.
I love the dubbing.
Steel is my word.
They're really bad dubbing.
I am too old to break it.
If Wellington runs for the coast, none of us will get home to Berlin.
When he got wounded, he bathed in brandy, like baths full of brandy.
Nonetheless, because I have served you before, sir, I have ordered the retreat.
I'm not sure why he wouldn't trust the English, because he served with the Prussians.
But God help us if he does not stand.
Prussians wouldn't have had any reason not to trust the English.
Grouchy! Girard! You take 30,000 men. 30,000 men, 1/3 of my army. You take them in and you pursue. You understand? You pursue Blucher. You don't let them regroup. You don't let them consolidate. And above all, you don't let them rejoin.
Okay, people don't really understand what this means. Because if you're following somebody, obviously they can leave wherever they want. What Napoleon means is, like, harry the rear guard. Actually attack them all the way, like, constantly attack. Don't just follow them, but actually attack the rear guards. Send cavalry out to harass them. Make sure they can't possibly march. Like, really, really mess them up. What Grouchy and they do. Well, Grouchy is the one who always gets blamed, so I'll just say Grouchy. What Grouchy does is just follows the Prussians. And the Prussians manage to, of course, just get on a road and head straight for Waterloo. So,
But there are 10 different ways and directions Blucher might go, sir.
hence why you need to keep contact.
Not a scatter of birds, Marshal Grouchy. We'll find him on one road.
Enough's enough! Let's not have any disagreement. Any disagreement will only lead to disaster. Is that understood? Grouchy, Girard, you can go.
I like how they reuse that clip. The guy stepping forward. That's a really insane battlefield. I'm not sure. Why would you leave these cannons there? Somebody should be taking those. They're very expensive.
Old Blucher. Damn good looking and rolled 18 miles back.
So, we go to...
Keep on that way, too.
Well, I suppose in England they'll say we've been licked.
That's Delacey Evans, that the ADC that we mostly see. He went on to command the British Auxiliary Legion. This guy here, Evans, was in charge of the British Auxiliary Legion in the Carlist War. So you can see, of course, awful medical conditions.
I like the cut of your men, Gordon.
Damn forward fellas with a bayonet, Wellington. Beaten eggs from the cradle up on a lemon a month.
That's ostrich plumes, by the way, for the Highlanders.
All from my own acres, bred of myself. Some there could call me something more than colonel, eh?
I doubt Wellington would have enjoyed hearing that. Quite a. He's very upper, big toff, I think they call it. Here we have. Is that Hougoumont or La Haisson? I think that's meant to be La Haisson.
That must be the whole army.
They're still positioning, sire.
Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake.
This is the day
Bad
before.
manners, eh?
Picton's famous umbrella.
That wood behind us is a sound. If they push us back, it'll be like a war. The whole army will be cut to pieces.
So what Picton's saying is there's a wood behind the army. And what he's saying is, if the army tries to retreat back through that wood, the formation will break. And a broken formation is basically death. Cavalry will just pounce on you the second you leave the wood. You're not gonna be able to form up. Your cavalry are gonna have to scatter. Your artillery will have to scatter. And of course, for an enemy charging at you, they don't really care if that cavalry have to scatter because they can just mince you up. Just stabbing you and whatever. Your artillery are going to have a real tough time getting through that. And then what Wellington basically says is, oh no, it's not that bad, which is a lie.
There's no undergrowth in that wood. You can drive a battery of 9-pounders. A whole army can slip through it like rain through a grate.
Not true.
Suicidal, if you want to know.
It may surprise you to know, Picton, that I saw this ground a year ago. And I've kept it in my pocket.
Actually, it is true. You notice that the general staff officers are wearing their bicorns, whereas the actual regimental officers will be wearing shakos, like the men, which is a new addition in 1812. And of course, torrential rain was a massive factor at Waterloo. Which is a real bitch since Wellington forbid his men to use their blankets,
He's no student of Caesar.
at least the men close to the enemy.
Positioned himself badly. Got the trees at his back. We'll give him no provocation. Maybe he'll leave tonight.
Yeah, sure. Remember, if you want to see the Battle of La Haisson, which is sort of the central action of Waterloo, like as in the centre, not the main action. But you can see my my series I've done at La Haisson. This is just basic thievery. Of course, Inniskillings was nothing new. And this, I don't think this ever happened, this thing. Wellington was actually quite strict. Blah, 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 bunch of stuff, not really important. Where Napoleon was very sick at Waterloo. A really bad stomach virus or something like that. Corporal, a bunch of Napoleon stuff. Unimportant. Basically, that's all just saying that Wellington is that Napoleon is sick, is all.
In his favour.
It was 12. Yeah, this is something they show here is like really dry ground. Waterloo was incredibly muddy. It's filmed somewhere in Eastern Europe. Most of these extras are Russians, and so basically the reason that you couldn't start the battle early is because you just couldn't move the artillery into positions early enough. They've done tests with modern artillerymen trying to drag around 6-pounders. Which would be the most common type of artillery, but definitely not the biggest. And it just exhausts you trying to drag a 6-pounder up in the mud that you would have had in northern Belgium, or in Belgium, sorry. So yeah, the battle is really delayed a lot because of that rain and that mud. This is of course the guard band, and the guard you have the cuirassiers, voltage things there. Carbineers, sorry, or grenadiers, sorry, with the red plumes. Carbineer there with the bronze cuirass. Dun, 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 dun. Napoleon had these sort of, oh yeah, that's great, kicking mud and shit everywhere. Napoleon had these generals that were sort of guys that he could have command a corps. Or I think the thing I've read is command a corps or prepare a banquet. Like these sort of unattached generals that he could just send everywhere. So you'll see a lot of them in the background. This did happen, by the way.
Sir,
There's actually a miniature of this if you want to see it.
Expert.
As I am second in command, and in case anything should happen to you, what are your plans?
To beat the French.
They really hated one another. It comes off as very good-natured in that, but they really despised one another. Quite actively hated one another. Look at how awesome this looks with no CGI. All real. This is fantastic. Look how crazy it looks. Oh, it's just amazing. Look at the things you can't get on CGI, like the bayonet glints and the just runners going back and forth.
Music and banners. Quite beautiful.
The lifeguards are in the back with their
You're a lucky fellow, aren't you, Hay?
nice things there.
No wonder in your first battle.
Except he died 2 days ago. Yeah. Wouldn't be anywhere near as much dust. Guns are spaced out quite nicely. Can't see their caissons, but that's right. It's a movie. You don't need to have all the stuff there. It's actually quite a lot of wargaming table, looks like, isn't it? Like a couple of French guns. Your sort of small-ish. I imagine these are meant to be battalions, or maybe your small battalions. Bunch of cavalry walking around and just random officers running around everywhere. That's actually really. This is exactly what a wargaming table looks like. It's really cool, like a big field thing. It's really cool actually. It looks exactly like a wargaming table. Small units of flags, skirmishes at the front. It's a marvel that they managed to pull this off. It looks phenomenal. Obligatory Vive la France. If you've ever played Holdfast Nations at War, which is like a first-person shooter, Call of Duty style Napoleonic thing, which is actually way more fun than it sounds. If you hit, I think it's B, the character will go Vive la France. So that's constantly getting spammed.
Over there, near the road.
Someone's got a dog. That's cool.
The monster.
You need two hands to steady a telescope. You wouldn't be able to see anything with one.
Thief of Europe himself.
Your Grace, Napoleon has ridden within range. May I have your permission to try a shot?
I think that's meant to be Captain Mercer. The only reason I say that is because I can't think of any other... what looks like a horse artillery, but it's really a rocket artillery, which is slightly different. Although they wear the exact same uniform, and it means nothing. I've actually painted up a horse artillery... No, I haven't. I painted up a normal artillery infantryman. If you'd like to see that on my channel, I'll put a link below. I believe this is meant to be Captain Mercer, who is very, very important at Waterloo. Well, more important of the history of it. We have his private journal from the campaign, which is very useful. I think that's meant to be Mercer.
Certainly not. Commanders of armies have something better to do.
You can see a bunch of Dutch and Belgians on the right-hand side there.